I only interact with you on Twitter.
One of them is about it's a weird, not really fun position.
I'm just with tangiest mayo. We should celebrate. Put Ford on the computer. I probably have that on video. Right into the mayo. That'll be the end of the video. I'll just say we need some afterwards some graphics on top. Tangy mayo time. Tangy mayo transition. Right in there. Our mayo chop on it.
So knowing what kind of you can kind of use that to sell yourself. As far as definitely if you can get your hands on that's really good. But Excel, if you can learn how to make a good spreadsheet.
That's something I'm whatever.
Why are so involved in training?
And everybody all work in the same every team is the exact opposite experience.
It's a lot of just learning from your mistakes, I guess. And nothing you can't
I guess are you ready? Can you crunch it a little bit lower than you think you could crunch it? Just because most people.
I'm gonna. So I just updated technique, so I know they're gonna be hiring another person. I
would play around with how.
I will send them to you, so you're on the radar. Obviously, I don't know what they're doing or whatever, but right, but just
at some point you get finishing a turn or the cardboard. So you might be able to. I don't know if that would be a website or
I have plenty of time waiting for my phone to render.
How would you say render? Take a separate. That's really.
It's I'm trying to do it high quality. And I have to make it really high quality. Oh wow, that's really cool. So I would double on it. And it takes a very long time to render. Probably has to be better for me. It's
I'm moving somewhere that doesn't really have things other than that studio. That's not what we got.
I'm so pumped to see.
I mean, I plan to
just have you be free NBA.
Yeah. I'm excited to do
It's working? Yeah. Audio's coming through. I couldn't tell what anybody was saying because there's 7 people all talking right here at once. But it's working. Apparently.
I don't know. I didn't really get how
yeah. I mean, the nice thing is that when even when I used to use my phone, I put it in that little thing on top of the Phillytron.
Oh yeah, right.
And film this whole space, and you can totally hear the audio.
Oh really?
Yeah. So because I know, yeah, I think it's because there's only one person talking usually at a time that it just picks it up pretty, clear enough that if they're just talking, when somebody would then play music through the speaker on the projector, and then it would try and pick that up. It was just it's you can kind of tell what that is, but I wouldn't send that link to anybody and tell them to watch it if you really want them to hear your music.
Let's just art purely.
Yeah. You just go on stage and play that YouTube video of you at the thing playing the music through the
That reminds me, there was a Reddit post of a guy took a picture of himself with tattoos and then had how did you take that picture? So then there's another angle. Wait a minute.
But how do you take that one?
it goes like 5 in.
No. And then the very last one is like, this is actually what it looked like, and there's like 20 cameras around and everything. So stupid. Are you good? What's up, brother? How are you? Good, good. Oh. Why are you so sleepy? Why are you so sleepy?
Because I eat a lot of meals.
I feel like you just get tired.
Not like I've been having a time. Not like a specific reason. Just like, because why not?
Just feel a little out of sorts. It happens. It happens to the best of us.
I'm good.
What? No, I don't know.
Hey everybody! Hey, we're going to do one quick show and tell, and then announcements to get to the talk. So start the show and tell now. All right. Hi everybody.
Hey, Greg.
So this project technically isn't mine. It's something that I was kind of brought onto in the middle of it, and I worked on it for a little bit with getting it to work on a website. I just decided to show it off a little bit here. So what it is it's basically like it's supposed to be for a website that's going to be working with Magic the Gathering cards. And what it does is, just open up the image here. So what it does is, there's a website, MTG Goldfish. There's a website, MTG Goldfish, where you download different text files that list off your cards that you have in your deck. And what this website's supposed to do is it's supposed to take those cards from that list and import it into the project so that it evaluates how strategically sound the deck that you would build would be. If I can, there we go. Just basically write your deck list here, click a button, and it should import it into Sima. Takes a minute for it to try to flow the page. There's the list of cards, and it's a little bug. This is still kind of in the prototype phase, so it might not work properly here. It might be stuck on this loading page sometimes, but that's essentially it. It's just a little website that takes people's cards and like runs it through like a bunch of tests and see how good they are. It was built already. I help write like the HTML things for that. So yeah, that's it. Cool.
It looks awesome.
Beautiful.
I mean, welcome to games.
Hi everybody, welcome
Hey.
to Game Mechanics.
What's your name again?
My name is Shawn, and I'll just be going over a few of the night's announcements before we get to the main agenda. So, oh wait, I have a thing I can plug in, so I don't have to. Yeah, look at that. All right, I love this. Okay, all right, cool. Announcements. That's me, Shawn. Announcements. First, we are at Indie Hall. Everyone give Indie Hall a nice big. If you don't know what Indie Hall is a wonderful co-working space. You can pay money to rent out space here, part-time, full-time. So those are an Indie Hall member. Tell you all about Indie Hall and its wonderful perks. But they're a really, really great community, and I just want to thank you for letting us have this event here twice a month. All right. You know that movie, Avengers Endgame? You know, I did this last time for Infinity War,
doing it again, no spoilers, okay? I know there are some people who might not have seen the movie yet, so just be respectful of other people who have not seen it, okay? So remember that time Thanos? Nope, no talking about that. All right? Remember that time that Thor? None of that either. All right? Right? Remember when Betty Waite got the? Well, no, that's a spoiler, so none of that. Okay? None of that. All right? All I'll say about that. Okay, this is tonight. Speed runs. I didn't change the slide, but speed run lightning talks. That's tonight. So get ready for one.
What am I looking at? Did you do the art yourself?
No.
So good.
Yeah,
You're so talented, Shawn.
This is us. We're gonna because this.
Wow. Shawn, your cars are good.
Oh, and lightning funny, yeah. Because these cars are fast, and Lightning McQueen is lightning and lightning. Is that Microsoft Word? It's no, I found it online. Okay. Oh, IGA stuff. I found that on the website. Yeah. So, you want to talk about IGA? IGA is doing something.
So, hello, I'm Jason. I'm vice chair of the local chapter of the Philadelphia IGDA, the International Game Developers Association. And every month we have student development or professional development or other kinds of development related talks and events. And this coming second Tuesday of the month, we're having a concept art panel together by Rob Nally. So we have a lot of really talented concept artists. So hope you can come and join us at the Site Center on May 14th.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, next slide. There is, in 2 weeks, there'll be a Unity shader workshop here, starting around 8 o'clock. It's going to be through Zoom, so it's going to be live stream. It's going to be a beginner/intermediate tutorial, but if you want to show up and learn some cool Unity shader stuff, show up. It'll be really cool. Maybe we'll get some pizza, I don't know. I don't think about that, but maybe we should. Yeah, and it won't, if you're not interested, you'll be able to split off and go somewhere else. But yeah, it's happening in 2 weeks here. We are partnering again with Digital Fringe for 2019 and to be part of their Digital Fringe Festival. It will take place during the traditional Fringe Festival. If you go to fieldgamemechanics.com/fringe, you can sign up. If you sign up through us, you don't have to pay the fee, which is $50. Just let me know you're going to sign up and I'll give you the promo code. It's a very top secret promo code that you probably wouldn't be able to guess anyway.
Is it Fringe?
No. But it's like...
Is it Shawn?
It's like EGM. No. EGM Fringe? No. Stop. But yeah, you can sign up, get the promo code, because last year there was a really cool Fringe showcase at Harrisburg University, right, near Spring Garden. And we're thinking about doing another one this year. If you want to talk about it, come to the event organization meeting, which should be next week, and we can discuss what we might want to do for a Fringe Festival this year. So we'll see if that comes together. Also, Fringe is looking to do some weekly events during the week of Fringe Festival. Have like a live podcasting thing and maybe somewhere cool like Cherry Street Pier. They don't know yet, but they also want games to be there and they want to select games that we help them get through the Fringe Festival. So if you want to be part of a really cool event during Fringe Festival, sign up, use the promo code, and get involved. It'll be really cool.
When is it, like September?
September, yeah, the month of September, and they're looking to do it every weekend. So we'll have different people maybe show up every weekend, and yeah, that's basically it. But it'll be really cool. All right, if you do not know this, please get to know it. This is our code of conduct. The main points are right there. Be inclusive to everyone. Respect the space, digital and the real world. So we respect each other here, respect each other online, like in Slack and Facebook and all that. Constructive criticism, hold each other accountable, and we have a suggestion box channel in Slack if you just want to throw something in there.
Who gave you a laser pointer?
It was in the thing.
I'm really mad about it.
Yeah, but no, Camden discovered it was a laser pointer. So if you're playing Camden right there, I'm using the laser pointer. And yeah, go to fieldgamemechanics.com/code of conduct for the full code of conduct. All right, Patreon is really where we get a lot of support from financially, so if you want to throw money our way, you can. Do one-time donation at /donate, and hang out with us on Slack and a bunch of social media stuff. Okay, so tonight, let's go back to that slide, is the lightning talks. So let's get to it, and Danielle's going first, so just take a moment to set up.
On that slide, it said that, concerning if you talk to the dead things, but it's in the dead.
Oh yeah, that's the thing that's being worked on right now. So
Shawn?
I just
So it's just you?
Yeah, no, it's just me. It's only me. Any
Yeah,
concern?
problems come to show.
Yeah, unless it's about me, then just leave me alone. No, but that's being worked on. Yeah. Are you? Oh, it's okay. You could also do HTML or good. So if you don't know what the lightning talks are, they're basically 7-minute talks, and everyone here is allowed to talk about anything they're passionate about for 7 minutes. It doesn't have to be game related. Some of these might be game related, but they don't have to be. And then afterwards, we'll do a really short Q&A. It can't take too long because we have other talks to go. So we are going to get started. And are you ready? Okay, here we go.
Okay, I'm Danielle.
Oh wait, sorry. Let me set the timer, I guess.
So, no pressure.
Just to make you feel a little bit nervous.
If you don't know me, I'm Danielle. I'm finally graduating college after 3 schools and 5 years. So the past school year, I've been working on my senior thesis film called Meetup. It's a virtual reality film based on my relationship with my sister and my journey learning to understand and accept drug addiction and mental disability. My inspirations are Pearl, the animated film. Is also like a VR 360 film. If you haven't seen it, it's really good, and I highly recommend watching it. Life is Strange, which is one of my favorite games, and the graphic novel Skin. So my process for this film was, I kind of did all of them at the same time, but I guess if I had to break it down, I started with writing, character design, set design, 3D modeling, rigging, animation, and then putting it all together in Unity. Here's my concept art for my characters. There's 3 different stages for each sister. So this is the little sister. The top is the youngest. Far left is the second youngest, and then this is, and then the older sister. She's supposed to have glasses on. She has glasses on the actual film, so I popped them in there. These are some quick set design sketches that I did, just to get a feel for what I wanted to make. I did all of my stuff in the Unity timeline, which was the first time I ever used it. It was pretty simple, actually. Yeah, that was surprisingly, I thought I was going to have a lot of trouble with it, but it wasn't that. This was kind of an early render of what my scene looked like. Just my unrigged models with the toon shading on them. And then here's some final renders of my film now. It's due tomorrow, so yeah. So I'm really happy with it for the most part. It's the first time I've ever done 3D animation, so I'm not the most happy with how the animation came out, but there's not really anything I could have done about that. So I just want to I'm not gonna show it because, by the way, the screening is this Sunday at 2 p.m. at the University of the Arts Gershman Hall. If anyone's interested in coming to see it, and all the other animation theses. But yeah, that's my talk.
Do we have any Q&A?
Will it be available online to watch? Have a video type of thing?
Yeah, I'm planning on uploading it to YouTube, so it's probably not going to be public for a little bit of time, but I'll post it in Slack or something when it's public.
Because it's VR, are you just there and observing what is happening, or are you?
Yeah, the camera's just in the center of things, and actually let me grab my phone. Can you pass me that phone? Got it. I ended up making an app for it, but it's kind of laggy, so I'm not sure if I'll end up like putting it up anywhere. It also takes everything. But I made it for the Google Cardboard. But honestly, I think it's gonna work better on YouTube. So it takes like a minute to load. But yeah, it loads slowly.
So how did you get that cartoon effect like with the lines? Is that all like a custom shader or something?
Yeah, actually Tom over there, he helped me with some of the shader stuff for the post-processing. I used a shader that, for the toon shading, I used something that Steve Pettit recommended to me, and then all the other shader stuff is Tom.
Nice. Yeah, the style is really good.
Yeah. Also forgot to mention, Steve helped me with rigging. Yeah, Tom helped me with post-processing, and a bunch of other people helped me, and I'm very thankful for that. So, yeah.
Is there dialogue, like either audio or?
So it's alright. It's animated to the song "Anthems of a 17-Year-Old Girl" by Broken Social Scene, and Cameron Connor did like a lot of the mixing and sound effects for me. So they're not in my thing yet. I have to do that tonight.
So it's not complete yet.
Yes, it's
A true
project. Thank you.
Alright, next up we have Phil with you and Corey. Yeah. I'll sit closer to the really front. That's how you get it.
Oh, that's what this system looks like.
Should we go? Oh. Ready? Cool. Hey everybody, I'm Phil. This talks about unit testing in Unity. I'm a big fan of automated testing and hadn't really heard many people talk about it in games, so I thought I'd make a little talk about what Unity supports for it. I had a different name that I came up with that I thought was too lame to use, but too lame to not share. It's called Unit testing. So, what is testing? The description I came up online, it's good words, is take measures to check the quality, performance, or reliability of something, especially before putting it into a widespread use of practice. When I say I usually mean that I checked it and I think that the software should work, like mostly. There's a whole crap tons of types of testing, with tons of overlap. Books have been written on every single bullet point here pretty much. The one I'm simply going to talk about is a subcategory of functional testing called unit testing. Unit testing is usually the first layer of code testing. What you're trying to do is directly test isolated behavior, or units of functionality. Generally it's white box, which means whoever's writing tests actually has access to the source code of testing. And unless you're in certain pair programming scenarios or companies that have a full-time person, it's usually done by the engineer who's actually writing the code that is being tested. Why care? Unit testing is definitely an investment. It takes a bunch of time to write tests and support tests, but it gives you a whole bunch of benefits. You can have a bunch more confidence when you're modifying code. I have a big compulsion to refactor things all the time, so that's super helpful. You can have faster iteration cycles. Instead of needing to get to a specific screen or a certain point in something you're using, you can just quickly be like, okay, every few seconds I want to tweak something and run a test. You can catch bugs sooner because you can actually test weird edge cases you wouldn't be able to generate naturally in a given scenario. You can write more modular code. When you have something that does 13 different things and you go to write a test for it, you're a lot more likely to think okay, how can I make 13 things that have conceptual integrity and are easily testable? When you're debugging stuff and you have test break at a certain point, you know exactly where to look when you start debugging. It exists as living documentation. I've been at companies where they've tried to have handwritten documentation. I've not really seen it work well, whereas a test, you can go through a class and read all the tests that cover it and see exactly how something's supposed to behave without needing to actually have somebody go out of their way to explicitly write stuff. That can be a great place to code dumb Easter eggs and jokes. I use the exact moment of the crash from Lost in every single test I write that involves time. I know a bunch of people use pizza and stuff. It's a good little place for a little levity at work.
Cases when you want to avoid using actual unit testing is when you have ambiguous and fluctuating requirements. You don't want to spend a bunch of time writing all these tests just to find out that you didn't actually understand what the problem was and you just burnt a ton of your time. You don't want unit test things that are overly dependent on mocking. Even if things that are reaching out to a bunch of like third-party services and you're like mocking away that behavior to fake it out, you're not actually testing what you're trying to test. If you have a lack of company buy-in, consistency with people using testing, or people not actually knowing what they're doing, it can be really painful and end up hurting more than it helps because you have false confidence and people just generating a bunch of extra work without much benefit. And if you have a small team with concrete deadlines at an endpoint, you can get diminishing returns because if you have a contract that's going to be for like 2 months and you're never going to touch the code again, if you spend a bunch of time writing tests, you might end up just essentially burning that time away. In games, there's some specific challenges with unit testing. A lot of times with games dev, it's time limited. There's a subset of games that will last for years and years, but a lot of times there's a concrete point where it's going to be released, supported for a bit, and then to end of life. Changes in requirements based on feelings. A designer might decide that, okay, like this doesn't actually make sense. Testers might find out that they hate part of it, and a bunch of your code base just gets burned away. Human testing prevalence. A lot of game companies have people that are physically there to test games, and it's going to diminish the returns you might get from doing more automated testing. If you have direct collaboration with non-engineers, they can end up causing a bunch of cases where you need to train people to write tests in order to support them. And games are filled with state. States can be a nightmare to test in games. If you have a discrete game moving around the world, you could theoretically have trillions of states that you need to test out. So, in specific Unity, I came up with a contrived live example. I made a very basic game, if you could call it that shifts colors based on time, and then takes user input to fluctuate what the actual hues will be. Just a sphere named Orbi. So, look at the script itself, it's real basic. Just an update method that's taking some user input, taking some time, and updating a color in the game. So Unity has fully baked-in support for something called NUnit, which is a good testing framework for C#. If you go into General for the test runner, they give a full UI over NUnit. So you can see here some tests that were set up. Run them on the fly. What it does is it creates a transient scene, runs your tests in a full scene if you want, with all the lifecycle hooks, so you can actually test out how a real game library is going to behave. So yeah, Unity provides a standard NUnit test, which is check inputs and outputs, and then Unity test, which lets you actually yield and wait on different lifecycle events in Unity. So an example of this is here I have a function that's just taking in a color, a gold color, and some dynamics of time and input, and asserting okay, I expect this to come out as a new color without actually dealing with the Unity game loop. Whereas in these cases, I'm literally setting up a game object that has different components on it that are actually going to be used by my classes, yields the weight for different points in the actual game lifecycle, and then test things after the fact to make sure that things running in the full environment in Unity actually would work as they expect. And then one thing you might have noticed is that in here I made this dynamics class to get input and time. Static members can be a real pain to test because you can't really mock them away. So one way you can wrap it up is literally just making an interface that has some specific functions like getting input, getting time. Having a real one that's just deferring out to the actual functions you want to use. And then in tests, you can set up these little guys that let you set some preset values so that you can use them in the exact same code as you use otherwise. And then, let's see an example. Let's say I'm testing this and I want to say that actual.a and then I can run it now. See that what I'm checking is actually, or maybe it'll just freeze on me completely. see things break and turn all red. And then you can fix things up and see it turn all green again. So it gives you a nice little like living visual representation inside of Unity of how your testing scripts are lining up. And that goes all green again. Just like that.
So is all this built into Unity?
Yeah, Unity has like pretty solid first-class support. This is all its test runner stuff. There's a little functionality to pretty much say that like you want all your assemblies to be able to be used in tests.
Right.
And then like this is how I found. Because originally I assumed like, oh, it's a game engine. Like it doesn't have good testing support. And then one day I just saw this like subdirectory and creating stuff, and I was like, oh crap, C# test script, and just like went down the rabbit hole from there.
That's really cool. So can I just one more question? So
Yeah, of
like,
course.
So it looked like when you put together those unit tests today, it's like it's pulling outside of like the loop. So is it actually just running through those functions and like checking those things outside of the game, like for integrity, essentially?
So that was what I was saying with like these cases, where I literally created like a static function that I could then just test directly. In here, this is actually running in like a real scene and waiting on stuff.
Yeah.
So for example, if I hadn't like bypassed like physics, for example, you'll see it drop in like real Unity physics. So it's nice because they give you built-in functionality for doing like traditional unit tests, and then like a system baked around, hey, you can theoretically like mock out anything you might do with a game object in an environment in Unity, except for the fact that like games usually have more than a game object.
Right.
But
That's really cool.
yeah.
Wait, so it's not even a package you have to install? It's just like...
Nope, it's just baked into Unity by default. It has a little bit of a cost in that, like, I think there's a longer like startup time because it has to actually like, load the end unit dependencies. But yeah, everything's completely baked in.
It's not. Then you don't need to add it through package manager or anything like that.
Nope, just built into Unity. Cool.
Corey, you were up next. Let me get you set up here.
Story time, Corey.
I think you mean Corey time.
Oh no, I'm sorry. All right, everyone, here we go. All right, Corey, we're going to start in 5.
Oh wait, I got my own timer. But you can.
No, use your timer. Your timer's good. My timer's broken anyway.
I have my own timer.
I just count.
What if I just count down
Shawn's
from
timer
100
has
to 5?
64 seconds on it.
what if I just count down from 420?
All right. Hey everybody. My name is Corey. If you don't know me, I make games and I write fiction. Those are the two things I do all the time and think about the most in the world. So I decided to combine those two things into one talk about how I've been improving my short fiction through game design is my talk. I don't think I'm good at writing fiction right now, but I've certainly gotten much better over the last 3 or 4 years since I started coming to game mechanics. And I kind of noticed it very late, and I was like, why has this been happening? And so over the last couple weeks, I've just been thinking about like what about being in this community and doing game jams in particular has made me better about writing, maybe better at writing fiction. So that's what this talk is about. It's not insanely systematic, but I'm going to try my best to be understood. Okay, so here we go. See, this thing doesn't even work, so.
Oh, it might be off.
Okay. Okay, hold on.
Did you try turning it on, Corey?
Turn on.
Now,
Okay, here we go. Okay, so the structure of this very brief talk is going to be something that's very obvious about games, and then something that has taught me about fiction. Okay, so the very first thing is that games, what they are as an object is that they enable an experience, right? So a game is not the sort of like assets that it creates. It's not like the paper. It's not the code. It's none of that stuff. What it actually is this sort of like open circuit that when you slot a player into it enables a very particular experience, right? So in academic game writing, they sometimes call that the aesthetics or sometimes the dynamics, but usually the aesthetics of the game is the experience of interacting with the object, right? So I started to think about like, okay, so can reading be an experience? We kind of have this false understanding of reading as being a sort of objective transfer of information from these squiggly marks into our brain that just like zoom up there and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get this, right? But reading is actually a very embodied and chemical experience in which you look at these squiggly marks and your brain starts pumping juice and there's all this affect associated with it. In literary theory, this is actually called affect theory, and it's been tracked. They look at how certain genres will arouse certain embodied affects in your body, things like skin flesh and pupil dilation and things like that. This is probably best understood by going back to the beginning of the history of the novel, which is essentially 18th century Gothic. And at this time, when the novel was coming around, everybody thought about it as this very illicit object that was, I'll read a quote that actually exemplifies this best. This is from Barbara Benedict. She says, novel reading was understood as being for women and was associated with inflaming sexual passions and anxiety about not being able to separate fact from fiction. So when it first came around, the novel was very much understood as this illicit form that would arouse your kind of like passions in your body and would make you essentially go crazy, which is actually not so different as how people were thinking about video games in the 90s, right? People were just like, how are they going to separate the real world from the fake world, you know? Which is, of course, bullshit. So reading can be this experience, right? And it can be like it can elicit affect and emotion. So there's this guy, Ben Marcus, who explains this really well. And he talks about how language is a drug and how stories are these sort of designer drugs that are perfectly designed to go into your body and then make you feel something, right? So it's a really interesting way of thinking about stories as being this sort of like emotion and affect generator. Okay, so how have I brought that into my fiction? I'm going to try and be practical about this. The first thing I learned from working here is to be respectful of my readers' time. There's this really cool thing in game design you guys have where it's like, or me, I guess as well, where it's like if your player sits down and they're like, this isn't fun, you don't get to say no, right? You're not like, oh no, like, you don't get it. But that happens all the time in fiction, constantly. People will just be like, oh, it's because you don't get it. And so what I've learned over time is to be respectful of everyone's experience with my writing and kind of be like, oh, they're having an adverse reaction to my writing, and I have to trust them and believe them and kind of dig in onto why that happens. So not telling people no about why they're not interfacing with my writing, so being respectful of people's time. And it's also made me go bigger in a really interesting way. So I'm writing more melodrama, I'm being very plotty, I'm using genre a lot more, I'm being a lot more sort of like interested in people enjoying the work and creating affect and targeting particular emotions and being like, this story is about, and they're very big emotions, right? I'm not being nuanced anymore. It's like, this is about despair. Like, this one's about like, I want to make their body laugh, right? This one's about being scared, right? So that has been a very interesting new kind of writing where I'm not trying to explicate the kind of tortured maze of my soul and give it to people and just be like, help. And instead just be like, oh, well, this is just a thing for you that I made. Let's see how you interface with it, right? So that's something that I've learned from game design, which has been very exciting. Okay, so the second point I'd like to bring up is about fiction as an object. And I mentioned this at the beginning, which is that games need players to be a complete object. Like they fundamentally do not exist if there's not a player playing it, right? If I go up and play Tetris and it just runs, that is not a game, right? The player has to step into it and provide input, and the game gives them feedback, and it creates a loop in which the game is created in that cycle. It's a kind of like movement, it's an interaction. And so I started to think like, do stories need readers, right? If Melville had written Moby Dick and like thrown it into a cave, like would that still be a story? A lot of people would say yes, but I have been trying to think about that as no. Like actually no. Like without a reader interfacing with the story, it is fundamentally not a story. So I've been challenging myself to be like, why? What can the reader add in the reading moment to complete that circuit, to make it more essentially interactive? And so there's two ways I've been thinking about this. You don't go. See you about this. Okay. So yes, there are two ways, and it's through theme, a little bit of time, theme and metaphor. Okay, so I'll go quick through this. The first one is through theme. A lot of people think about theme as being this deep message being conveyed by the author that is meant to be discovered, like digging through the dirt and finding the nugget of information by the reader. And sometimes they find it and sometimes they don't. And I think a lot of stories are written that way. And it's stupid. Like, lately I've been trying to think about theme as being opening that circuit up and gesturing towards significance and gesturing towards meaning and explicitly asking my reader to complete that circuit for themselves. And so it means that I don't know the answer to the questions that I bring up when I write these stories, and I leave them open-ended. And not open-ended like the end of Sopranos open-ended, but like open-ended like, why did this image occur at the end of this story? And there's no right answer, right? And even to me, I don't know. And so it's been very illuminating to speak with people who read my stories, and they're like, here's what I thought was happening at the end of that. And I get surprised, right? It's just like, damn, yeah, sure, that's what I meant. So it's this kind of open-ended circuit as opposed to a didactic message, right? The last thing, I hit my 8 minutes, but if I can get one more minute, I'll go really quick. Okay. Is that I'm adding a lot more, I've been thinking a lot about figurative versus literal language in stories. And I'll give an example of this, but literal language I've been thinking about is like the cutscenes of games, where it's just like the only point of the cutscene is to deliver information to you. This happens and you're watching it. There's no room for the player to interact with a cutscene. There's very little room for them to interpret it. That's why you make a cutscene, is because you're like skipping past stuff that's important. And that's how literal language works. It's like the sky was yellow. It's like, great, now I know the sky's yellow, but it doesn't leave any room for interaction on the part of the reader. You can make that argument. Everybody imagines yellow differently if we want to get really high, but like that's not what metaphors do. The opposite of that thing, which is that it's another open circuit where you have to have the reader there to interpret it. So I'll just give a brief example from one of my stories about metaphor that explains that pretty well. So I wanted to write this moment where a character was kind of interpreting their own fear about the future with respect to climate change. And so the simple way to write this, the literal language way to write this, is you would say something like, it was cloudy, I started to worry about the future, right? Okay, that might be a universally felt moment, when it's like, hey, it's cold, it shouldn't be cold right now, damn, the whole earth's on fire. Like that might be like a commonly felt moment, but it's not leaving room for the reader to interpret it. So if you turn it into metaphor and it becomes something closer to like, I remember seeing the sky behind him, a brutal expanse of dark green, streaked with black clouds that looked like skid marks at the scene of a crash. So in that moment, what you're doing is saying like, why is this person looking at the clouds? Have you seen skid marks at the scene of a crash? You're going deep into your own memory. What do you feel in that moment of seeing skid marks? What does that elicit in you? Dread, fear, the unknown. It's this moment where if nobody reads that sentence, it doesn't work, right? That's the open circuit thing. If nobody plays the game, it's not a game. If nobody interprets the metaphor, it's not a metaphor. It requires the user to interpret it for it to make any sense and being good. So that is how I've been thinking about games and stories. That's it. Thank you very much.
Do we have any Q&A?
What's brain juice?
What's that?
What's brain juice?
Brain juice? I don't know. I'm thinking serotonin. Other ones. Spinal fluid.
Corey, do you hate colorblind people?
My bad.
Oh man.
Yes. Is anybody here for real colorblind?
Ian Backwards.
Yeah, I'm the pastel colorblind.
Can you see anything on this?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I'm just curious how this kind of line of thinking evolved for you, like as far as like bringing the two disciplines together and like trying to have them fuel each other. Did it go the other way? As like
I tried to think about if it went the other way, and it's not as clear, and I actually don't think it did. I think it's mostly game design informing fiction. I don't know why. With respect to like when it appeared, it has truly been going to game jams and seeing how open people are with their creations and just being like, here, play the thing, and then somebody just like walks off in 2 seconds. Like, the first time I saw that, I was like, damn, dude, if somebody read my story and did that, I would flip. And it was just like, why is that? And it's like, oh, it's because and that was probably the very beginning of it. But yeah, in terms of it going the other way, I'm not sure. Like, I've been having a really hard time integrating fiction into games. I think people just don't want to read when they're playing games, which is fine.
Since you've been starting to put this into practice, how many things have you written, and how much have you seen that evolve?
I've probably written 3 original stories, but the big thing has been rescuing dead stories.
Okay.
Like, you go back to a story that's like, why wasn't this working? And it's like, oh, it's boring. This guy's just walking around thinking. Like, you're not giving your reader a thing. And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe a guy walks in with a gun and he's a robot. And at least that gets you going. And then you're like, he's not a robot anymore, but yeah, so
cool.
I'll probably rescue 3 or 4.
Cool. Thank you.
Right, so I'm going to give those. You'll understand.
I thought he was gonna like pull a beer out of it, like something.
I think it's just
Sorry.
I'll just see.
Yeah, that's great. No, that'll be perfect. I'm gonna sit right here.
Probably like.
Let me start. Yeah, you know, I'm not gonna worry about that. Okay, good. Go with what you said.
All right, we are going to start the timer in. Sorry. All right, ready?
Yeah.
Set. Go.
Hey everyone. My name is Adrian Sandoval. I don't like to do long intros to these things if you saw the last one I did. So really all you need to know about me is I think way too much about video games. Specifically, I think a lot about Resident Evil. Mostly Leon Kennedy, mostly. But no, seriously though, we're 25 years out from the release of the original game, and it's really hard for me to like give context in 7 minutes why it was so important to everyone. But why it was important to me, this is the game I tell people is what made me want to be a game designer. Because, when growing up, I was not really big into action games. I was not very good at them. I don't have really good twitch reflexes, so I played a lot of RPGs, I played a lot of graphic adventures, things with a big exploration and narrative focus. And Resident Evil was like one of those games, except you could also shoot stuff. It was really cool. There were puzzles, there was a big mansion for you to explore, you had to find keys, and there were zombies, and that was way before the genre became like completely saturated. Really, Resident Evil kind of theorizes what started that, years after George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. But basically I have everything I love about video games fused together in a way I had never seen them before. Except for story, right? Like the Resident Evil games, they're not really known for like these like awesome tales or anything, and especially the first game is known for this like Z-grade acting. There were a lot of memes at the time. But here's the thing. Me and my friends, we got so into the story of the game. We talked about these games the same way people talk about Game of Thrones, or as we brought up earlier, Avengers. Like, we got really into these. And it wasn't just us. There were novels. I read all of these, except for like one I couldn't find. Most of these are adaptations. Some were a couple of original stories. They had their own little fiction. And then they made a movie. And we were excited about I only watched up to the second one, but like the first one originally was supposed to take place in the game's canon. We were excited about this. We thought about the possibilities and everything. And you know, this was kind of proof to us culturally that other people were getting into these games and the stories the same way that we were. I mean, not everyone was dressing up as the characters or maybe writing fan fiction in high school or anything. But eventually I started thinking about, okay, well, you know, I wanted to be a game designer and, you know, I like narrative-focused games. And I was like, why did we get so into this? Like, we understood that they were cheesy and that they were pulpy, but like for something about that drew us in. And as a game designer and getting really into that, I started, you know, I asked myself questions, which I mentioned in the first lightning talk I did. I like to ask myself questions about why I like the things that I like and how did this grab millions of people as well. And so I asked this question, does good game narrative require good writing and dialogue? And, you know, this question has come up a lot, I think, in the past like 15, 20 years or so. There's been a lot of think pieces. But I've never really been satisfied with a lot of the common conclusions. This is where I get upset that I ended up following Corey's talk. But like, you know, a lot of people came to the conclusion, games are an interactive medium, right? When people are not interacting with, you know, if they're not interacting, they're not being immersed into the world, and that's what makes them unique from movies and books. And that's why, you know, cutscenes are immediately, they are bad, right? Like, that makes a logical sense. Games aren't movies, right? Okay, well, so a lot of developers started putting in a lot more journal entries. It kind of goes to what you're saying. There was a lot more reading, audio logs, like in BioShock, and a million games after that started happening. And I think those things can work, but I think they can also be done poorly, the same way that cutscenes can be done poorly. Like, I guess, like in BioShock, like there was a really big economy in recordable cassette tapes, and people just started throwing those like everywhere, right? And like, you know, like a lot of these texts, they get very long, and eventually you're just kind of like, you know, eventually you start skipping through them and things. And like, I would posit that if games aren't movies, well, they're not books and they're not podcasts either. And I think that's a very reductive way of looking at it, but I think that games as movies, like saying games aren't movies is also a reductive way of looking. I think that, you know, there is ways to make all of these things like work really well. And I want to talk a little bit about one of the things I think Resident Evil does very well, because I think that no matter what kind of story you're making, no matter how pulpy it is or silly, you have to really ask yourself as a designer, are the mechanics you're doing breaking the immersion or are they help enhancing the immersion? Now I said at the beginning, or I showed at the beginning, that there is one weird trick that I want to talk about. There's a lot I could say about this, but I only have like 2 minutes left, so I'm not going to. So I want to talk about this one weird thing. This is probably like one of the most popular scenes in Resident Evil. There's an Indiana Jones style puzzle where you have to swap out a broken shotgun for a working one. And if you don't have the broken shotgun and you just take it, you get locked into a room, ceiling starts to come down on you and you get crushed, right? But if you're playing as Jill, because you get a selection of what character you play as, and the story's slightly different, Barry, her friend here, comes, rescues her, pulls her out, and says this really cheesy line because he's a dad, he's into dad jokes, that kind of thing. But here's the thing about this scene that a lot of, even people who like are big fan series like I am, don't realize. You can miss this. This scene does not always happen. And it is absolutely possible for Jill to become a sandwich, honestly. See, Barry is actually having his own adventure all around the mansion. There are all kinds of scenes that you can actually trigger where Barry will meet up with Jill, and sometimes he gives her things like the shotgun. There's even a scene that if you get past the first half of the game really, really quickly, essentially you speedrun it. There's a nice little foreshadowing where he's having an argument with the villain because later you realize, spoiler alert for a 24-year-old game, that he's been blackmailed, that he was being blackmailed, his family's being held hostage. And you get a nice little foreshadowing event that not every player gets to see. And this is a really simple trick, right? It's just flags that are set at points in time. The player is in that right spot, they will see this scene. But I like it for several reasons. One, it gives incentive to replay the game. There's like nice little bonuses you get, both gameplay, like the ammo and the shotgun, but also narrative rewards, like that scene I just mentioned. But what I really like about this is that it creates a feeling of persistence. Like the world is happening around you. Characters are there even if you don't immediately see them. And a lot of exploration-heavy and action-based games that aren't RPGs don't do things like this. And Resident Evil didn't have to do this either. Like I said, a lot of players don't even see these scenes. I don't see a lot of people even talking about this mechanic, but it's there and it helps make the mansion feel like a real place. And like I said, that's just a small case of the things I really wanted to touch on in this talk. I'm already over time. because I think Resident Evil does a lot of things to sell its world that a lot of contemporary games don't. I could probably do a full talk about just this door loading scene alone. But if I want to leave you on anything, it's really this, is that there is so much unlimited potential in interactive storytelling that goes so far beyond whether or not the player is currently playing. And it's really up to you as the designer to figure out what's going to work best for your game. But don't just go with conventional logic. Think about things a little bit outside of the box, because there are so many things that can draw the players into the world and make it feel more real and more organic. It just really depends on what you're trying to do and what fits your game best. All right, that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Are there any Q&A? Any questions that we have?
One question. I like the idea that what are your thoughts on how Half-Life does that, where they feel like a cutscene, but you still have control and it dictates you?
So I think it was done. It's funny because that was actually originally in this talk one of the things that got cut. I think that the original Half-Life does it very, very well, and I absolutely love the second one, probably more so, because especially that opening that really puts you into, you know, you've got like a half hour before you actually shoot anything. It really like engrosses you in this like this world, right? However, it also likes to lock you in a room when characters are just expositioning to each other. So now I'm still interacting, but I'm in a cutscene, and like these scenes go for a very long time. And kudos to Valve for like, you know, I pick something up and people will start yelling at Gordon like he's a child, which is fantastic, and I love it, and that helps. But it really does seem like they were aware of how like it kind of breaks what they were doing with the original game. It was just kind of a band-aid over it. Yeah. And I don't know if that works better than a cutscene, because really like the books and the audio logs, eventually I become acutely aware that I'm playing a video game and I'm no longer playing a character. And I think like that's the only time in Half-Life 2 that happens. And I think it's really interesting. So honestly it's a mixed bag. And Half-Life 2 is one of my favorite games, so.
Nice.
Yeah.
Questions? So tell me a little bit about that opening door.
Okay, so now they did this because it was a loading screen, right? Like every time you go into a door into a new room, it has to like load the next area. So, and this was their solution to doing it, right? Was this idea, but it like just like you're opening the door, but it creates like suspense. There's kind of like this like horror moment, and like. Even in the first game, they play with this idea. If you try to leave out the main gate, like it's established in the opening cutscene that there are zombie dogs all around the mansion ready to eat you. And if you open it up in the original game, a dog tries to jump out at you, and you like quickly close it shut. And then in the remake, the dogs actually get in, and you have to like fight dogs, so it punishes you almost for trying that and being clever. But it still like enhances the story, right? I think Resident Evil 2, like you open the door, and then like you see zombies behind it. And then even in like the newer games, 7 and the 2 remake, they don't do this necessarily, but when you open a door, you have to like force your character to go through, and there's like a small pause as you're doing it, like the character's like being hesitant about it. It's kind of like their version of doing that in a modern game where they didn't have to, which I think is really cool.
It's kind of like Mass Effect's elevators, but like actually certainly like.
Right, yeah, the Mass Effect elevators, like, actually, like, they eventually start joking about it. And again, like, the Half-Life thing, I think that's kind of them playing, like, well, I guess we're just going to crack a joke now, because what else can we do?
Awesome, cool. All right. Next is me, so.
We already saw your presentation, Shawn.
I'm just going through the announcements again. It'll take 7 minutes.
The announcement with spoilers.
You actually go through the entire plot.
Stock footage.
Stock footage. I would never use stock footage because that's like illegal, right? Or something?
Definitely.
Notes.
Your presentation better not contain any stock images. Slide 1 of 68?
Got 7 minutes.
I already tried to explain this to him earlier.
Okay, don't worry. I'll figure this out.
Wait, hold on. That's like 10 slides a minute.
I got it. I got the timer.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody set a timer. We gotta keep Shawn on it.
I gotta riot. Shawn
Okay, no, but I will. Oh, there's a timer right here.
Oh, God.
How do we know we can trust you?
No, look. It
We
says,
can't. We're trusting Rachel. We
Okay.
have the timer over here.
Okay. Is everyone ready?
Yes. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Start right.
No.
Did it work? Not working?
Broke it.
Okay, here we go. My name is Shawn Pierre, and I'm going to talk about how not to make a pancake. So, what is the most important meal of the day? People often say what? That, can you guess, right? It's breakfast, right? Apparently, according to doctors and professionals, that breakfast is important, but I don't think so. I think most doctors are wrong. Really, I think the most important meal of the day is lunch. You can see these people, they are enjoying lunch. They're so happy they can't even eat food. So I've done a lot of research on this too, right? Some important websites have, we asked the question, why is breakfast so important? What does it do?
36 answers?
And we come to the conclusion, the answer to this is what? Is one. And the perfect, and look at the resource of the perfect paleo recipes obviously cannot be refuted, okay? So anyway, let's move on to the next thing. Let's get back to that thing called breakfast. Let's dive into some deeper philosophical themes surrounding it. And people eat a lot of things for breakfast, right? People eat a lot of cereal. Cereal is really quick. It's really popular. There are many, many types of cereal. But a lot of cereal can be really, really boring. And I don't know if I want to eat cereal every single day. Right? Some people eat a lot of fruit. Fruits are good. Apples, oranges, bananas, pineapples, lemons, fruit salads, fruit pies. People eat a lot of fruits. There are bagels. Bagels are fairly basic. Plain bagel, in my opinion, is very boring. And there's bacon, which people love a lot of bacon, but I think are too obsessed with. Okay, but probably one of the best breakfast meals, I think you could probably guess, it is pancakes. Pancakes are great. I think they're very high tier breakfasts. They're easy, they're fast and dynamic, and in their base form, I think they're more interesting than 90% of other foods in their base state. I mean, waffles are pretty cool too, but so look at this kid, he's not having a good time eating waffles. So waffles aren't as pancakes. And, do waffles have a chain named after it? No, they don't, okay? So, pancakes have an international franchise. I mean, you can find IHOPs all over the world. And obviously, I haven't verified this, but, take their word for it. I mean, they have the word international in it, so that means they have to be international. And you can trust their decisions. Anything they do is right. I mean, they're great. But anyway, back on track. Pancakes. They're awfully good, and that, after seeing these pancakes, we probably agree. But how do you make one? Well, the answer to that can be very, very, very deep, okay? Some people like to overcomplicate it. I don't think so. It's not really that complicated. Making them is really, really not too difficult, okay? See all this? This is what you need to make a pancake. But if that's too easy, we can make it even easier. You can just go to a store or a restaurant and order a pancake in 5 to 10 hours. You'll have something good in front of you, all right? But if that's too easy, we could get someone to provide you with some pancake batter, right? So let's dissect the recipe on how to make a pancake, all right? Pancake recipe. We love our breakfast around here. Okay, see, this is too long. And like most pancake recipes, you need to hear someone's life story before actually having to have a pancake. But you know what, let's not talk about how to make a pancake because this talk is how do you not make a pancake, right? So, let's talk about something you would need. You need a good source of heat. Good source of heat would be good. And if you don't have it, that would be bad. But how much do you need, right? This might be too much, but again, I'm not going to tell you how much you need, okay? Something like this, this is actually footage of a pancake being made. Something like this might be too much for your basic pancake. Here you can see that, clearly they're messing up their pancake there. All right? All pancakes are different and unique and mostly special in their own way. So, each one needs something different. But again, I'm not going to tell you how to make one because this talk isn't about that. This talk is about how not to make a pancake. All right, so we need to think about how long it takes making a pancake would make. All right, so we can't just make it quickly. A good pancake is not something that you need to make quickly. There's a different pace that you need to move at. I'm not going to tell you what kind of a pace, but it's something we're not going to discuss right now because once again, this is not how to not make a pancake. Okay, let's talk about some other quick ways on not how to make a pancake. Probably bad, you don't want to go to space, to make a pancake. Clearly bad, I think it's a pancake made with George Foreman grill. If you want to make a pancake on if you want a pancake half eaten and lots of dog saliva, then maybe make it on a dog, but good luck with that. Cats might be a good source of heat, and they will not move a lot, but good luck getting a finished pancake off your cat's head, because basically once it's on the cat's head, it wants the cat. That's how it works. Don't make them on your face, don't make them on your family's face. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little short story. I was at a hostel a few months ago, right? And they were really kind enough to provide us with pancake batter. And while we were there, people did two things that you're not supposed to do. All right, there was a lot of heat, a lot of heat. It was way too high, too much heat. And also, they did one thing you're not supposed to do. They went really, really fast. Okay? So, well, what happened after they made the pancakes? Well, this is what happened. You can't see what it is. We're going to enhance. All right. So, we want to go even deeper. Enhance again. All right. Is this too deep for us? Well, too bad. All right. So this person managed to do something very impressive. They managed to overcook and undercook their pancakes. And to be honest, I don't know how many pancakes are here or how many we had to kill after they started taking up life of their own. But it's something that they created. So as I leave you, I hope you learned a little bit, and I hope you remember 2 important things on how not to make a pancake. Okay, 1, don't use a lot of heat, and 2, don't go too fast. Thank you. Are there any questions? No. Only if I don't know you, and only if I show you how to make a pancake, and then you say, never mind, I don't want to do that, and then just turn up the heat and ruin your pancake. That's what happened after I showed someone how not to burn your pancakes.
When is your cookbook going to be available?
Yeah! It's on itch right now. Just download it. Yeah.
I want to know what your favorite kind of pancake is now.
I kind of like putting. I'm more partial to different syrups on my pancake. To be honest, like having I prefer I like doing strawberry pancakes and pancakes with banana, but I prefer having like a different syrup in a pancake. I love strawberry syrup and different types because that allows me to control how much of the flavor I want on my pancake, as opposed to having someone think they know how much is right for me. I don't.
Top 3 places to get good pancakes.
Not the hostel he say that.
Not the hostel. At least not by the people who make them.
Shawn's house.
No,
Shawn's house.
I mean, no, not my place. I make terrible pancakes. I mean, like most Amish like restaurant places have really good pancakes. So this is the door. I'm sorry. Hello.
I'm in the middle of the talk.
Hi. Yeah, someone will be there at the door.
Wait a
Hello.
Are you live?
You're like, I'm filming.
All right.
Which I can chance.
Yeah. Okay. Don't tell me I hung up on them. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have them.
Yeah.
With the current competitive breakfast meta, like what's your tier ranking for chocolate chips, bananas, and blueberries?
For pancakes? And
yeah.
Pancakes? Oof. So I mean, blueberries. Man, I think I might go bananas, blueberries, chocolate chips. And not because like chocolate is bad, but I mean like I feel like the nutritional values outweigh the sweetness and the funness. And plus, you can like get some more sweetness with the syrups that you use, and if you use too much syrup, yes.
Follow-up question?
Yeah.
When it comes to grapes, it's savory or sweet?
Oh. That's a longer discussion. I think I might have to go with sweet over savory.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Got it.
All right, I'm going to start.
Wait.
Oh.
Start now. I already started. You got
So that was excellent. Our conversation this week makes so much more sense.
All right, ready?
Okay. Oh, I'm ready.
All right, ready, set, go.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel, and today I'm here to talk about 6 things that I have learned as a result of being part of the Philadelphia game dev community. Woo! So in 2016, I came to a meetup called Dev Night, which was in a co-working space called the Game Forge. I was still in high school then, And I was working at a little game development studio in New Jersey called Island Officials with Adrian and some other really cool people. This was the first time that I had ever been in a room with other people who liked and knew how to make video games other than the studio that I was working at. And this is where my journey in the game development scene here began. So after high school, I did what plenty of eager young game developers do. I went to a very expensive college. And I was at school for a pretty short amount of time. But while I was there, I had some fun. I cried a lot. But I felt a disconnect between the work that I was doing on the weekends at this indie studio and being involved in the community versus where I was heading in school and the things that I was learning there and the culture there. So I did what lots of eager game developers do. I dropped out. And I left college, but I kept making games. And there was a sense of independence and drive to create unique visions that I had never felt was encouraged when I was in school. And seeing the community in Philadelphia made me really believe that there was value in taking a different path and taking risks and being independent in your own work. So that was the first lesson that I learned. I went back to work at Island Officials, and I released my first project as a credited game writer and producer. At this point, I was looking towards what was going to be next for me, and I knew that I wanted to really get involved in the Philadelphia community again. So this was On My Way, which was a game we made for the Tourette Association of America. So that's when I heard that the Philadelphia chapter of the International Game Developers Association was being revived after being dormant for quite a few years. And I decided to join the interim board with a group of really awesome people. And I loved it so much that when elections came around, I decided that I was going to run for the chair of the chapter. I was voted into the position and spent a year leading the organization's events, finding speakers, and learning how to speak in front of people without violently shaking. It taught me how to be a leader, and that the best leaders guide and provide support rather than command and take control. This is what I like to refer to as service leadership, and this is something I use today, especially in my role as a producer. Around this time, I also started attending that meetup again, which was now called Philly Game Mechanics. Here I met people who didn't just care about their own work and themselves, but they cared about the people around them and the success of the people around them. And this wasn't something I had really experienced anywhere else before. When I put time into building relationships with the people at this meetup, I realized that we all became stronger. I learned that networking, this thing that I had always heard about as this really intimidating idea, was really just making friends. And soon I became an organizing member of Philly Game Mechanics. I got to work with people that I really, really admired, and when I offered up an idea, their answer was almost always the same. That sounds like a really cool idea. How about you do that, and we'll be here when you're ready for help. I learned the power of just doing things, that when you create something that you're excited about, other people will see that and they'll become excited too. But if you don't take those first steps, no one's going to do it for you. I learned that letting down the ladder is one of the most valuable and meaningful ways that I could give back to my community. As I gained opportunities, I had more and more chances to offer them to the people around me. And Philly has such a great culture of this. I got several really awesome opportunities just from the people in this room recommending me for different things. I ran a game jam with the Anti-Defamation League. I recently gave talks at several colleges to people who were the same age as me, and while that was really intimidating, I hoped that I would be able to share experiences that I was lucky enough to have so that those people didn't have to make the same mistakes that I had made. Most importantly, I learned to jump on opportunities. Last year, I moved into the city to work at PHL Collective as an associate producer. When I got the email asking if I'd like to interview, thank you, Steve, who isn't here, I did everything in my power to prepare and make sure that I got that job. I got to work on projects there that were much more ambitious than I'd ever worked on before. I got to mentor a hackathon here for with Shawn for the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I served as a regional organizer of the Mid-Atlantic for Global Game Jam, and all of these things were things I did just because I jumped on them. I saw the opportunity and I took them. So all of these lessons have converged to make me the developer I am today, but also the person that I am today. Recently, I was offered a really, really exciting opportunity, and because of the experiences I'd had here, I knew that I was ready to jump on them and that I had to. So this Monday, I'm going to be getting in my new car that I just bought, packed to the brim with pretty much everything that I own, and I will be driving to Colorado, where I will be joining the team at Deck 9 Games. This opportunity took all of the lessons I learned here to get, and I know that this opportunity will use all of the lessons that I've learned as I relocate to a brand new city that I've never been to and know nobody at. And I will be joining an established team who've worked on really awesome projects such as the prequel to Life is Strange. Philly has given me a place to really flourish. The community is small enough that I haven't gotten lost, but large enough and strong enough to have helped me really grow into someone that I feel good about. I've been lucky to get opportunities, and I've worked hard when I've gotten them, but I really also have this community to thank for taking me under its wing and making me both the developer and the person that I've become today. So I wanted to include some really nice sentimental pictures of me and all of the other community members. But for some reason, most of the pictures that I had on my phone were of Shawn. So there you go. This is what I leave you on. What? Thank you. Visit to Philly Game Mechanics, and I'm like 99% sure that this is a silhouette of Shawn. I'm almost positive. So, yeah.
Or my cat.
Any questions?
Can you go to the next slide?
There isn't a next one, sorry.
Can you enhance the pictures of Shawn?
Congrats.
Thank you.
Are you excited?
I am excited and equal parts terrified.
Good. So how big is Deck 9? And how many people, or at least, and how many people do you think you would have to work with any project?
Studio is about 60 people, but like pretty quickly growing, probably like 200 by the end of like 2 years from now. And I'll probably manage like 15 to 20 people, so about what I manage at PHL.
And everyone doing the same thing, or everyone doing separate?
Probably. I'll probably be in either 2 or like 1 or 2 teams based on like really specific things that I'm doing. For those of you who don't know, I'm a producer, so I work basically with timelines and people and help get things finished. Yes.
Is there a game development community in that area? Or?
No, there's not. Not at all, actually.
Really?
Which is something that maybe I'll try and tackle. But for the time being in a really large studio, I think that'll kind of be like a nice community to get in with first, and then see. There aren't really any other studios in Colorado other than this, so yeah, something to work on. Yeah.
What made you excited about that studio?
When I did my interview with them, I think they just seemed really passionate about the parts of me that I really like being really open to feedback, being ready to be service leadership as a concept for leading teams, and just general mentorship and growth being things that I really cared about. And that wasn't something that I really felt from other interviews that I had done, so I felt really excited, and that was kind of why they cited that they wanted to hire me, so I like that.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, everyone has to say goodbye to me before I leave, for sure, because it'll be a couple months till I'm back, but then I plan on visiting a lot, so we'll see. Yeah.
What language do they speak in Colorado?
I don't know. I'm going to find out when I get there.
What day is it in Colorado?
No. Cool. All right.
Cool.
So we're done.
All right.
Oh, what's that shirt you're wearing in that picture with the shapes on it?
It was something called Waite.
Oh.
Yeah. All right, cool. That's it, everyone. Thank you for participating in this round of lightning talks. Maybe we'll be doing it again in a couple of months. Just keep. I'm gonna take this down.
I don't want to see me any more than anyone here does.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, for that.
yeah, so we'll be hopefully doing another one in a couple months. So if anyone wants to do one, just keep your ear to the ground, and we'll let everyone know. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the night. We'll be here for another hour-ish. All right, that's it. Thank you.
That's why Shawn and I both started laughing. So I was like, it seems like it's kind of. Also, Izzy says hello. And he was like, we filled out officer.
What day is yours? The 17th thing?
Yeah, it's a closing session, but you can like, it's open now.
Oh,
you can, like, come in
never.
overnight.
Never. I didn't know this was already new. Yeah, we had our own opening show the 24th, but that was like only VIP kind of thing. We like, so like already real professional. But
whatever, let us know.
Yeah, that's it. It's up on the Discord.
Good luck finishing your film.
Thank you. I'll do that. That was dope. Goodbye.
See ya.
Good luck.
Did you say hello, goodbye? Hello, goodbye.
Hey, Carly. Carly, yes. Do you know how to use houses? I understand how to what do you mean, sorry? No, it's like, it works a lot like Photoshop, it's just that everything is. Yeah, because I was planning to learn it this summer.
Everybody here to say bye-bye to Rachel. Bye-bye, say bye-bye, Tom.
Bye, Rachel. We could really use some zesty mayo right now.
Yeah.
It's like we're